I never imagined that a cold cup of coffee on a meeting table could mark the end of an entire chapter of my life. But the moment my eyes met the faint smile of Celeste Donovan, CEO of Synercom Media, I knew this was more than a routine internal briefing. My name is Emily Blunt, 43 years old, formerly the Vice President of Content Strategy at one of the fastest-growing digital media companies in Austin, Texas, for nearly 12 years. I had been there through it all, from the early days when we operated out of a dusty warehouse, helping shape every strategic decision, from team structure to market positioning. The emotion-driven marketing campaigns I created became the backbone of Synercom's rise in the creative media world. I once believed that what I was building here was more than just a job, that this company was my second home. But loyalty, I've come to learn, is defined very differently when power begins to shift. Celeste came in years after me, recruited from New York with experience from a major entertainment conglomerate and a demeanor sharpened by corporate politics. When she was appointed CEO, I genuinely believed we could align visions and grow together. At first, it seemed promising. We shared lunches, drafted restructuring plans, and even co-hosted global media conferences. But slowly, subtle changes emerged. My seat disappeared from critical meetings. My ideas began showing up under other people's names. My contributions faded from performance reports. Then, that morning, as I walked into the boardroom to present the new quarterly content strategy, a plan I had poured countless sleepless nights into, I saw it already in Celeste's hands, printed on her letterhead. She stood before the executive board and recited everything, word for word, as if she had written it herself. The only thing that had changed was the author's name. I said nothing. I sat in silence, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, the soft tap of pens, and the heavy rhythm of my own heartbeat. After the meeting, I confronted her and asked for an explanation. She looked at me, eyes unblinking, and with a faint smile said, "I think you've had your years to shine. It's time for someone else to lead." The calmness in her voice felt like a slap. 3 days later, I received an email from HR under the vague pretext of future-oriented leadership restructuring. My contract was terminated effective the end of the month. My access to internal systems was revoked. I had 48 hours to clear out. No farewell meeting, no public gratitude, just a cardboard box, a few personal items, and the awkward glances of old colleagues as I stepped out of the elevator for the last time. I didn't cry. I didn't say much. The apartment that used to pulse with late-night calls and project deadlines now echoed with a kind of silence that felt almost cruel. I sat on the sofa, watching the golden reflection of the sunset bounce off glass towers, and for the first time in years, I had no idea what tomorrow looked like. I had always thought betrayal was something that happened to other people, not to those who built things with their bare hands. But I realized then that it's the loss of belief of trust that truly breaks a person. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post anything online. I needed emptiness, a place to fall, maybe even to hit bottom. A week later, while cleaning through old folders, I stumbled upon a draft labeled Project Lumen, a proposal that had once been dismissed by the executive team as too sentimental and commercially unviable. It was designed to connect independent content creators with small businesses through emotionally driven marketing models. They once told me there was no space in the market for such emotional content. But in that quiet apartment, alone, I realized I still believed in it, not just because it was a forgotten brainchild, but because, for the first time since the fall, it made my heart beat again. I began rewriting the plan, not for anyone's approval, but to see if I still had the courage to rebuild, to stage a comeback from what had been discarded. Just as I was structuring the steps, my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice trembling from Ohio. She told me my father had just been diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer, and I understood. Some heartbreaks do not wait. I shut the laptop, booked a red-eye flight that night, and left for home, on the plane from Austin to Cincinnati. I stared through the window at clouds drifting under the wing and wondered how much I had sacrificed chasing ambition. My father was the first to teach me about pride and patience, but now, seeing him frail in a hospital bed, I felt like someone who had forgotten the lessons that mattered. I stayed for 2 months, listening to the steady beep of machines, counting the quiet seconds, and every night, I rewrote Project Lumen, not just as a business plan, but as a reminder to myself that I was not finished yet. Still, at that moment, I had no idea that this downfall would become the foundation of my revenge through success. I just hadn't figured out where to begin. There are moments when no one needs to say a word for the air in the room to shift completely. And one of those moments came on a Wednesday afternoon as I was preparing a pitch for a chain of independent bookstores in Kansas City. Ryan gently pushed open the garage door, holding his laptop with a face he couldn't disguise as anything but tense. He said nothing, just turned the screen toward me and played a video that had started circulating on LinkedIn. It was a recent keynote by Celeste Donovan at a national media conference, where she unveiled what she called a new platform initiative connecting creators with small businesses through emotional data and AI-driven behavioral insights. Under the name Nova Connect. I needed a few seconds to catch my breath. The interface projected behind her looked almost identical to the original design of Project Lumen, the one I had once submitted through Synercom's internal email system back when she was still CEO and I was still the VP of strategy. It wasn't just the concept slides on true value in emotional content and the conclusion about sustainable brand community relationships were copied so precisely they left no room for denial. What shook me wasn't being stolen from again, but the sophistication with which she had rebranded it as something new, as if no trace of its origin had ever belonged to me. Ryan sat in silence before whispering, "I guess they still have access to your old internal folders." I didn't respond immediately. I needed time to truly understand the emotion that was rising within me, not anger, but something like brushing against a scar that hadn't fully healed. 3 days later, one of the investors I'd pitched to sent a brief email canceling our meeting, citing that they had chosen a similar direction with a faster scaling platform. I didn't have to ask which one. At the same time, an article appeared in Marketing Weekly praising Synercom's new model under former leadership, describing the pivot to emotional AI as a bold move demonstrating innovation. My name was nowhere to be found. Not even once. It felt like being erased from history, like I had never played any part in the creative process. But instead of lashing out, I returned to the Lumen plan and chose not to alter a single word to chase the market. I believed in the real people using our platform, in the small brands long overshadowed by media giants, and in the independent creators often dismissed simply for not having enough followers. Ryan and I agreed to upgrade our security protocols, locking all internal documents from outside access, and kept our original course: no theatrics, no chasing awards, only helping each real client reach real outcomes. The following month was a string of sleepless nights as our user base quadrupled, bringing with it a flood of technical support tickets, onboarding requests, and customization needs. Every time I received a message saying, "I just closed a deal thanks to the campaign we built with Lumen," I felt that something lost was slowly being rebuilt. But the next twist came when a major potential client called and said they wanted to pause discussions, citing an industry source warning them that Lumen was using unauthorized data. The phrase nearly stopped my heart. Ryan immediately ran a full system audit and uncovered that an unfamiliar IP address had accessed our API 2 weeks earlier. We reported it to one of his old friends, now working in cybersecurity for a major software firm in Dallas. 4 days later, they confirmed the IP originated from a satellite Synercom office in Arizona. The story had reached further than I imagined. For the first time in my entire comeback journey, I felt a wave of true rage, not because my reputation was in question, but because they were still playing dirty even after I had left their game behind. I sat in front of my laptop for nearly 3 hours, rewriting an official response email to the client, firmly stating that Lumen was fully independent, had never used or accessed any external system data, and would provide third-party security reports to verify it. Then I wrote a blog post not naming names, just recounting the journey of building Lumen from its earliest drafts and sharing our belief in starting up with real emotion in a market losing its sense of trust. I didn't expect much from the post, but 3 days later, it was reshared by a media strategist with over 800,000 followers. It went viral under the caption, "When silence is the loudest answer," and the comment section was flooded with support. Among the names was one that made me pause, Lauren Harper. She left a short comment. "This industry needs more people like you." I read that line again and again, then quietly shut my screen. I knew then that I didn't need to confront Celeste directly, because the market's response was the fairest verdict of all. 2 weeks later, a message arrived from an independent journalist through Lumen's public inbox, asking if I would be open to an interview about rebuilding a career after being removed from leadership. I agreed on one condition: no attacks, just storytelling. The interview aired under the title Betrayed, Rebuilt, and the true value of trust in a broken age. It reached over 200,000 views within 3 days and was widely shared in local media circles. What I hadn't anticipated was that more than 20 small brands across the U.S. reached out with collaboration offers afterward, including some that had rejected me during our early rounds. Lumen began gaining traction in industry forums as a case study for how a small platform could survive and grow not through massive funding, but through a vision fiercely protected. Meanwhile, Celeste Donovan disappeared from all Synercom events. Her social media remained silent for 3 weeks, followed by a single official announcement from Synercom stating that their board was reviewing long-term strategy and internal operations. I didn't need to hear more to know what was happening. Lumen was not a miracle, but it had survived enough to make me believe that this journey wasn't about retaliation. It was about proving that what had been stolen could still be rebuilt from scratch, with perseverance and conviction. And in the very moment that the person who pushed me out began facing the consequences of her choices, I understood more deeply than ever that a remarkable comeback is not about becoming the biggest winner, but about becoming the truest version of yourself. Despite the knives in your back and the darkness that once swallowed every door, there were nights I sat alone in my new apartment in Austin. No longer the high-pressure, overscheduled space it used to be during my time at the old company, but a small and quiet place where the soft amber light of late afternoon streamed through the curtains and painted gentle streaks across the wooden floor. And I realized I was no longer living in retreat or avoidance, but was truly present. After the interview that gained attention, after the surge of collaboration offers, and the quiet withdrawal of Celeste Donovan from the industry, I no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone. But one thing had become clearer than ever. I was ready to return, not to a former company, not to reclaim a stolen title, but to return as a builder, as someone laying the foundation for a new generation of connection between content and emotion, between people and brands. Ryan, who had never left my side, suggested we expand Lumen into a mentoring program for young independent creators, people with ideas who had no clue where to begin. I found myself nodding before he even finished the sentence. It wasn't a strategic decision. It was instinct. Because I understood now that starting a business isn't only about launching a product, it's about creating a space where others can rebuild too, after being knocked back to square one. We started with a trial group of 10 young creators from different states, each with their own style and focus, but all sharing the common experience of having been rejected by major agencies for being unmarketable. One of them was Natalie Greer, a documentary filmmaker from Omaha whose production deal had been canceled because her stories were too raw, too sad, not commercial enough. When I asked her why she kept going, she simply said, "Because I don't know another way to live honestly." That answer brought back memories of my younger self, the one who believed that if you just stayed true, everything else would fall into place. I'm no longer that naive, but more than ever, I understand that if there's one thing worth holding on to, it's the reason you started in the first place. We built a content mentorship program called The Honest Core, where creators like Natalie could learn how to tell their stories without compromise, yet still find ways to resonate with the market. At the same time, Ryan and I developed a new version of Lumen with an intelligent suggestion system that could match brands to content styles based on emotional maps and real interaction patterns. Progress was not fast, but it was right. Piece by piece, things began to fit together. Early users became advocates. Hesitant partners returned with newfound respect. And one turning point came when we were invited to speak at a Southern Regional Creative Media Conference, the same annual event I once attended only as Synercom's guest. This time, the organizers wanted me to speak on entrepreneurship after disruption and the journey of building Lumen. It took me 2 days to decide, not out of fear, but because I knew it would be the first time I stood on stage not representing a big company, but myself, what I had lost and what I had reclaimed on the day of the event. The lights weren't as blinding as I had imagined. I didn't wear the stiff suits from before, just a beige shirt, soft trousers, and the same old leather shoes I had worn back when I was still an executive, kept as a kind of memory. I opened my talk with an unscripted sentence. I was once betrayed by the place I called home, and it took me a long time to be able to say that out loud. The hall fell silent. I told the story of Project Lumen, from its early days in a small garage, to the theft, the false accusations, and how I chose to rise, not through retaliation, but through results. I spoke about revenge through success not as defense, but as a deliberate act of creation, that each time I wanted to go back and call them out. I asked myself whether I could build something better instead. The talk ended with an applause that wasn't loud and triumphant, but deep and steady. I stepped off stage, shaking hands one by one, receiving collaboration invitations I once thought I would never see again. What I didn't expect came later that day, as I was gathering my things backstage, when a woman approached, blonde hair loose, eyes tired but still holding the same confident posture. It was Celeste. She wasn't in a suit, didn't have a team, just carried a small leather bag and a single card in her hand. "You spoke beautifully," she said. I nodded, unsure how to respond. I listened to every word. She continued, looking at me directly. No deflection, I'm not here to apologize. I know you don't need that, but I wanted to say, what you've built, it's impressive. She handed me the card and turned to leave before I could say anything. Inside the card was no apology, just a single line. Thank you for teaching me the power of silence. I don't know if that was remorse or just a graceful exit, but what I do know is that, where I once needed validation to feel worthy, now I could see clearly that what I had chosen to preserve and what I had built said everything that needed to be said. I no longer needed to win against anyone. I only needed not to lose myself, and for the first time in years. I felt light when looking back at the past. No bitterness, only a quiet clarity that some things must be lost so we can return to ourselves fully. I believe the moment that truly marked my return wasn't when Lumen reached impressive numbers, or when I stood on stage recounting the story of building again after falling, but on an ordinary Monday morning, like any other. When I was making coffee in the quiet of my small kitchen and received a message from a woman in Oregon. She was the owner of a small, handcrafted flower shop that had nearly closed down after losing touch with her customers during the pandemic. She wrote, I just made my first big sale in almost a year, thanks to the storytelling campaign I ran through Lumen. You have no idea how hard I cried. I read that message again and again, not to check for details, but to feel every layer of emotion beneath it. And in that moment, I understood that while people used to measure my worth in quarterly reports, now I chose to see my true value in messages like this. Lumen was no longer a startup project. It had become a living network where people who were once rejected found real connection, made real sales, and told real stories without needing to embellish or chase views. Around that same time, a piece of news spread through the media world that surprised me just as deeply. Synercom announced the shutdown of NovaConnect less than a year after launch, citing market underperformance in a leaked internal memo. The board admitted that their recent strategy had leaned too heavily into tech and lacked the human element. No one mentioned Celeste Donovan by name, but everyone in the industry knew. I didn't feel joy or vindication, just a wide and quiet space opening inside me, as if a chapter had closed for good. Maybe Celeste thought that recycling an old idea in a new wrapper would be enough to win. But she didn't understand that what gives a product its worth isn't the formula. It's how it's born and how it lives alongside those who use it. In silence, I watched NovaConnect vanish from the market like a faint shimmer on the surface of a lake, leaving little sound, just a slight sorrow for what could have been good if it had started from the right place. As for me, I kept building Lumen not for speed or scale, but for depth and longevity. Ryan and I invested in a community support team, launched a personalized consulting channel so that every small brand could have someone walk with them through the process of telling their story. Some investors started returning with offers once they saw Lumen featured in trade publications as a rare example of emotional media surviving crisis. But I turned most of them down. I didn't need more money. I needed trust and the freedom not to be pressured into chasing false growth. We chose a small fund in Vermont that shared our philosophy of sustainable development and slow partnership. In exchange for full creative independence, that decision brought me more peace than any number ever could. 1 year after Lumen's official launch, we held a small gathering in Austin to meet our user community. The venue could hold just over 100 people, but every handshake, every look, every word of thanks made me feel like I was standing inside the very dream I had once drawn, in my mind a real ecosystem of trust being restored. Natalie, the documentary filmmaker, came and told me that her new film had been picked up by an educational platform to use in their curriculum. A bakery owner from Sacramento shared that, after a Lumen-supported campaign, she had to hire 3 new employees. Then a young man named Elijah approached and shook my hand, telling me he had almost quit after his first year failed. But then he saw my story and thought, if someone who had been discarded by her old company could start over, why couldn't he try again? I just smiled. It wasn't a rehearsed or polished smile, but it was the deepest answer I could offer to all the wounds I had carried. I don't know how far Lumen will go. Maybe one day it will need to evolve or even come to an end. But I know for certain that it has already done what I once didn't dare to dream after being betrayed. It didn't just help me make a remarkable comeback through results. It helped others believe that failure isn't the end if you can hold on to who you are. I no longer obsess over rising above someone or proving my place in the industry. Instead, I spend my time reading user feedback, personally editing tutorial scripts, and occasionally writing down my own journey as a reminder that what is worth preserving doesn't live on leaderboards, but in the lasting relationships built on trust and sincerity. The day I received an email from an international media organization inviting me to speak on the role of emotional marketing in rebuilding post-crisis communities, I simply saved the date and went back to finishing my current work. I no longer feel the need to retell everything, because what's happening now already speaks for itself. If there's one thing I've learned through it all, it's that you cannot stop someone from betraying you. You can't prevent someone from stealing your credit or twisting your story, but you can always choose how you respond. And sometimes, the sharpest form of revenge is not to stoop low, not to unmask, not to knock on old doors, but to open a different one and let the light do what it does best. Some mornings, I woke up in my old bedroom at my parents' home in Cincinnati, where the dim light of dawn filtered through the curtains and made everything feel like it was moving in slow motion. And I realized that what was quietly coming back to life wasn't just my inner strength, but the sense that there was still something left unfinished that only I could complete. During the weeks of caring for my father in the hospital, in those fleeting conversations when he was still alert, and the gentle way my mother handed me warm coffee, I began rewriting Project Lumen not as a polished plan, but as an act of resistance. I no longer wrote it for any executive board, not to prove to Celeste Donovan that I had been right, but simply to have a conversation with myself, to see if what I once believed in still held any meaning. And the more I wrote, the clearer I saw a gap in the market that no one seemed to be filling. Small brands yearning to connect with consumers, not just through products, but through story, emotion, and trust. I dove into research, spending nights studying emotional marketing case studies, analyzing the latest consumer behavior data, and reworking the entire interaction model between independent creators and small businesses, rather than building a massive, complex platform. I redrew the idea as a flexible ecosystem where independent content creators could build sustainable relationships with local brands, supported by emotional storytelling tools powered by neutral AI that analyzed user behavior without interfering with creative identity. It sounded far-fetched, but when I began testing the demo, I could feel a quiet vibration of something genuine, something I called true value. Convincing a developer to join me at this stage was another challenge. I remember that rainy afternoon when I drove to a small cafe on the outskirts of Dayton to meet Ryan Whitaker, an old friend who used to work as a software engineer for a tech firm in Columbus. Ryan had once asked me to collaborate on a personal project 7 years ago, but I turned him down, too busy with Synercom, too confident that I didn't need anyone else. Meeting him again now, I no longer held the position of a successful executive. I was someone who had been quietly pushed out the back door, holding on to what sounded like a fragile idea in a market obsessed with cutting costs rather than investing in emotion. But Ryan didn't ask many questions. He silently read through the entire plan, then nodded and said, "We can try, but I need 3 months and a reason to believe." That reply made me realize everything had to start from scratch, from trust rebuilt step by step, not the kind of default trust I used to take for granted in management. We started working out of Ryan's old garage with a wobbly wooden desk, a few whiteboards propped up by bookshelves, and a coffee machine that clicked constantly. I took charge of all the content, user testing, building guides, and scouting potential brand partners, while Ryan focused on back-end development and the recommendation algorithm. Every day brought new hurdles, from losing our first build to a hard drive crash, to having our first 2 pilot clients back out because they didn't see immediate feasibility. But strangely, I didn't feel the panic I used to. Maybe because this time, the failure was mine to carry, and the persistence was mine to claim, untouched by any corporate structure or borrowed expectations. I started reconnecting with people in the industry, not to ask for favors, but to seek critique, to request honest feedback. One of them was Angela Moore, former creative director at a major agency in Denver, who had once worked with me on a campaign about lost trust for an organic food brand. We spoke over a video call, and after listening, Angela quietly sent me a list of 6 small businesses in Colorado struggling to reconnect with customers after the pandemic. "No promises," she said, "but if you've got something to demo this month, I'll send the link." That was the first signal of hope. Ryan and I decided to speed up. We worked from 7 a.m. until late at night, retesting every user interface flow, rewriting our emotional analysis algorithm, and distributing trial access to 20 creators I had met through previous industry events. One night, close to 2 a.m., I opened my laptop to find an email from one of the brands on Angela's list. They agreed to test Lumen for 14 days to launch a campaign for a new juice line, on one condition, that I personally guide their content team. It was the first time my hands shook as I typed out a confirmation, not from fear of failure, but from the quiet realization that someone, finally, was willing to offer me a second chance. The following days were a flurry of calls, remote coaching, script editing, and working with their young team to rebuild the story of their product using imagery, sound, and emotional data from past customers. When the campaign ended, engagement tripled, and they became Lumen's first official client. But when I started pitching our deck to early-stage investors in Austin and Seattle, I realized the real challenge was just beginning. Many investors declined within 5 minutes of the video call, saying the startup lacked excitement. One even bluntly told me, "Emotional marketing is what big companies use for brand polish, not what small businesses use to make money." I didn't argue. I wrote everything down. And later that night, I posted a short piece on my long-neglected blog, sharing the story of building Lumen from a small garage. Unexpectedly, a local journalist who covered startup stories picked it up. 3 days later, I received an invitation to appear on a small podcast focused on people who had been betrayed and rebuilt their lives. I didn't think anyone would care, but after the episode aired, my inbox flooded with messages from small creators and local brand owners. Some were just words of encouragement, but many asked, "How does Lumen work?" or "How can I try it?" I stared at my buzzing phone, overwhelmed with emotion. In the quiet aftermath of being cast aside by my former company, it seemed a new wave was forming small. Yes, but enough to remind me that I hadn't been buried. What I didn't expect, though, was that during a tech and education conference in Houston, where I presented on emotional applications in media, the host turned out to be a familiar face, Lauren Harper, former deputy director at Synercom, the same person who once sat beside me in so many meetings, when our eyes met after so many months. She smiled gently and said, "Celeste isn't there anymore. She was questioned by the board for the declining numbers. Rumor is she's stepping down for good." I didn't respond, but something stirred quietly in my chest. Lumen wasn't a great success yet, but at least it had begun in the right place, and what I needed to do now was keep going